When I discovered what my parents did behind closed doors while I was fighting for my life in the hospital, I realized blood means nothing when it is poisoned by greed. They chose money over their daughter, silence over support, and lies over love. But here is the thing about silence. It works both ways. What they thought would stay buried forever just became their worst nightmare. Sometimes the quietest revenge is the loudest victory, and mine was about to shatter their perfect little world completely. Where are you watching from tonight? If this story of family betrayal and sweet justice resonates with you, smash that like button and subscribe for more real-life karma stories. Trust me, you will want to see how this unfolds, because what my parents did not expect was that their silent daughter had been listening all along. My name is Serafina, and until 6 months ago, I believed I had the most supportive family in America. I was 28, working as a pediatric nurse in Portland, Oregon, living paycheck to paycheck, but happy with my purpose in life. My parents, Robert and Margaret Whitfield, owned a successful real estate development company that had been thriving for over 30 years. They were pillars of our community, church leaders, charity organizers, the kind of people everyone respected and admired. Everything changed on a Tuesday in March when I collapsed at work. The diagnosis hit like a freight train: acute leukemia. Suddenly, my world became a sterile hospital room, chemotherapy sessions, and endless medical bills that insurance barely covered. I was terrified not just of dying, but of the financial burden crushing my family. My parents immediately stepped in, assuring me that money was no object, that they would handle everything while I focused on getting better. "Sweetheart, do not worry about a single bill," my father said, squeezing my hand with tears in his eyes. "We have been saving for decades. Your health is our only priority." My mother nodded vigorously, stroking my hair. "We would sell everything we own before we let you suffer. You are our daughter, our everything." For weeks, I felt overwhelmed by their love and support. They visited daily, brought my favorite foods, and spoke constantly about our family vacation we would take once I recovered. They painted pictures of a bright future together, of grandchildren they hoped to spoil, of the house they wanted to buy me as a recovery gift. Their devotion gave me strength during the darkest moments of treatment. But something felt wrong. My medical bills kept arriving at my apartment, marked "past due" in angry red letters. When I mentioned this to my parents, they brushed off my concerns. "The hospital billing department is disorganized," my father explained. "We have been paying everything directly. Do not stress about paperwork." 3 months into treatment, I was finally strong enough to go home for a weekend visit. I needed to collect some personal items from my childhood bedroom when I overheard my parents talking in their study. What I heard made my blood run colder than any chemotherapy ever had. "The medical bills are getting out of hand," my mother was saying. "We need to figure out how to minimize our exposure." "I have been thinking the same thing," my father replied. "If we transfer the house and business assets to offshore accounts now, we can claim financial hardship. Let the hospital write off her debt as charity care." "But what if she finds out we have been lying about paying her bills?" "She will never find out. Cancer patients do not have the energy to investigate their finances. Besides, she trusts us completely." My mother laughed. Actually laughed at my naivety. Sometimes I cannot believe how gullible she is. 30 years of building wealth, and she expected us to throw it all away on medical bills. We worked too hard to become wealthy, just to lose everything because our daughter got sick. Exactly. We can maintain our lifestyle and let the system handle her debt. If she survives, great. If not, well, at least we protected our assets. The casual way they discussed my potential death while protecting their money made me physically sick. I stumbled back to my room, my legs shaking not from weakness but from rage and betrayal. My parents, the people who claimed I was their everything, had been lying to me for months. They had not paid a single medical bill. Instead, they were actively hiding their wealth to avoid helping their dying daughter. That night, I pretended to sleep while they checked on me with their fake concerned faces. They tucked me in with gentle kisses and whispered reassurances that everything would be okay. Their touch felt like poison against my skin. Over the following week, I did something my parents never expected from their gullible daughter. I investigated. Using my laptop from my hospital bed, I researched public records, business filings, and financial documents. What I discovered was even worse than I had imagined. My parents had not just been lying about my medical bills. For the past 5 years, they had been systematically moving assets offshore, preparing for exactly this type of situation. They had studied tax avoidance strategies, consulted with lawyers about asset protection, and even increased their life insurance policies on me. They had been planning to let me die rather than spend their money on my treatment. But the most devastating discovery was a recorded conversation on my father's phone that I accessed using his computer password, my childhood nickname, Angel. In the recording, they discussed how my death would actually be financially beneficial, since they would inherit my small life insurance policy and avoid any future financial obligations. They had calculated that letting me die would save them approximately $2 million. My parents had chosen money over their daughter. They had chosen silence over honesty. They had chosen their wealth over my life. But they had made one critical error in their calculations. They had underestimated their gullible daughter completely. The revelation hit me like a sledgehammer, but instead of crumbling, I felt something else entirely: clarity. For 28 years, I had been the perfect daughter, obedient, trusting, always putting family first. But lying in that hospital bed surrounded by machines keeping me alive while my parents plotted my financial abandonment, I realized that being a good daughter to bad parents was actually being bad to myself. I spent the next 2 weeks developing a strategy. My nursing background had taught me to be detail-oriented and methodical, skills that would serve me well in what I was planning. I also had something my parents did not expect: access to their home office and financial records through my childhood bedroom computer, which was still connected to their home network. The first phase of my plan involved documentation. Every night when they thought I was sleeping, I photographed financial statements, recorded phone conversations, and compiled evidence of their asset concealment. I discovered they had moved over $4 million to accounts in the Cayman Islands, purchased properties under shell corporations, and even created fake debt instruments to appear financially distressed on paper. But the most damaging evidence came from their email communications with their financial advisor, Thomas Sterling. In these emails, my mother explicitly wrote, "We need to ensure that Serafina's medical situation does not compromise our retirement security. Can you recommend additional asset protection strategies? We are willing to explore all options that prioritize our financial stability over her medical expenses." Sterling's response was equally damning. "I understand your position. Many families face similar dilemmas when adult children develop expensive medical conditions. The strategies I outlined will ensure your assets remain protected regardless of the outcome of her treatment." They were discussing my life as a medical situation and my potential death as an outcome while strategizing to avoid financial responsibility. These were not parents. They were financial predators who happened to share my DNA. The second phase involved allies. I reached out to my cousin Marcus, my father's nephew, who worked as an investigative journalist for the Portland Tribune. Marcus had always been the black sheep of the family, often clashing with my parents over their materialistic values. When I showed him the evidence, his reaction was exactly what I hoped for. "Jesus, Serafina, this is criminal," Marcus said, his face pale as he reviewed the documents. "This is not just asset hiding. This is fraud, tax evasion, and potentially elder abuse if they have done this to other family members. I need your help exposing them," I told him. "But I want to do this right. I want them to face real consequences, not just embarrassment." Marcus connected me with Rebecca Torres, a forensic accountant who specialized in asset recovery cases. Rebecca was a fierce advocate for victims of financial fraud, and when she saw the evidence, she immediately agreed to help pro bono. "Your parents have created a sophisticated asset concealment scheme. Rebecca explained during our first meeting. But they made several critical errors that we can exploit. They used personal email accounts for sensitive communications, they did not properly obscure the paper trail for offshore transfers, and they filed false financial statements with multiple institutions. The third phase was the most delicate, gathering additional evidence without alerting my parents. I convinced them to let me work from their home office during my recovery, claiming that staying busy helped with my mental health. They eagerly agreed, probably hoping that keeping me occupied would prevent me from asking too many questions about finances. Working from their office gave me access to their physical files, computer systems, and phone records. I discovered that their fraud extended far beyond just avoiding my medical bills. They had been systematically cheating on taxes for years, claiming false business expenses, and even defrauding investors in some of their real estate projects. But the most shocking discovery came when I found a folder labeled Contingency Plans, hidden in my father's desk. Inside were detailed scenarios for various family financial emergencies, including my medical situation, potential lawsuits, and even my grandfather's care costs. Each scenario included strategies for asset protection and liability avoidance. They had literally planned for every possible way their family members might become financial burdens. The folder also contained a document titled Serafina, Medical Emergency Protocol, that made me physically ill to read. It outlined exactly how they would handle my medical crisis. Provide emotional support while avoiding financial responsibility. Maintain plausible deniability about their wealth and position themselves as victims if anyone questioned their actions. It was like reading a manual for emotional manipulation and financial abandonment. During this time, my parents continued their charade of supportive parents. They brought flowers to the hospital, posted concerned updates on social media, and even organized a small fundraiser among family friends, money that went directly into their personal accounts rather than toward my medical bills. Watching them perform their parental devotion while knowing the truth felt like being slowly poisoned. The breaking point came during a family dinner they hosted to celebrate my improving health. Extended family members attended, offering prayers and financial support for my continued treatment. My Aunt Susan discreetly handed my mother a check for $5,000, saying, "I know medical bills can be overwhelming. This is for Serafina's care." I watched my mother accept the check with tears of gratitude, thanking Susan for her generosity, while promising that every penny would go toward my treatment. That check, like all the others, would disappear into my parents' personal accounts while my actual medical bills remained unpaid. Sitting at that dinner table, surrounded by genuinely caring family members who were unknowingly funding my parents' deception, I felt something inside me crystallize into pure determination. My parents had not just betrayed me. They had weaponized the love and concern of our entire family to further their fraud. That night, I made my final decision. The time for gathering evidence was over. The time for strategic exposure had begun. I contacted Marcus and Rebecca, informing them that I was ready to proceed with Phase 4 public revelation and legal action. But I had one additional requirement that surprised them both. "I want to confront them first," I told them. "Before the legal proceedings begin, before the media exposure, I want to look them in the eyes and tell them that I know everything. They took away my right to trust them, so I am taking away their right to hide." Marcus and Rebecca both advised against direct confrontation, warning that it could jeopardize our legal strategy if my parents had time to destroy evidence or flee. But I was firm in my decision. "They spent months lying to my face while I was dying," I said. "They are going to experience the same helplessness they tried to impose on me. They are going to know that their perfect plan failed because they underestimated the daughter they were willing to sacrifice." The confrontation happened on a Sunday morning in late September, exactly 6 months after my diagnosis. I had scheduled a family brunch at their house under the pretense of celebrating my improved health and discussing future plans. My parents were delighted, seeing this as confirmation that their strategy had worked perfectly. I remained their trusting, grateful daughter who suspected nothing about their financial betrayal. I arrived early, letting myself in with my childhood key. I found them in the kitchen preparing an elaborate meal with genuine smiles and excited chatter about our family vacation plans. For a moment, watching them cook together in their beautiful kitchen, I almost felt sorry for what was about to happen. Almost. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk," I said, setting my laptop on their granite countertop. "Of course, sweetheart," my mother beamed. "What is on your mind?" "I know about the offshore accounts. I know about the asset transfers. I know you have not paid a single one of my medical bills. And I know you plan to let me die rather than spend your money saving my life." The transformation on their faces was immediate and horrifying. My father went completely pale while my mother's expression shifted from loving concern to something cold and calculating that I had never seen before. "Serafina, you are clearly confused from your medication," my father stammered. "We have sacrificed everything for your treatment." "Really?" I opened my laptop and began reading from their email communications. Quote, "We need to ensure that Serafina's medical situation does not compromise our retirement security. Should I continue, Dad?" My mother sat down heavily, her hands shaking. Where did you get those? "From your own computer system. Did you forget that you taught me your passwords years ago? That you always used my childhood nickname for everything? You made it very easy for your dying daughter to discover that her parents are sociopathic criminals." The next 30 minutes were the most brutal conversation of my life. My parents cycled through denial, anger, bargaining, and finally a cold honesty that was more terrifying than their lies had been. "You have to understand our position," my father said, his voice taking on a business-like tone. "We worked for 30 years to build this wealth. We cannot throw it all away on medical bills that might not even save your life." "Medical treatment for cancer is not guaranteed," my mother added as if explaining basic economics. "From a practical standpoint, preserving family assets for the surviving family members is the responsible choice." "Surviving family members?" I laughed, but it sounded hollow even to me. "You mean yourselves? You were planning to profit from my death." "We would have grieved appropriately," my mother said with chilling matter-of-factness. "But grief does not require financial ruin." That was the moment I understood that my parents were not just selfish or scared. They were fundamentally broken human beings who had no capacity for genuine love. I was not their daughter. I was a liability they had been managing until it became inconvenient. "Well, here is the thing about family assets and surviving family members," I said, closing my laptop. "I survived. And now you are going to discover what your daughter learned about strategy during those months you thought she was too sick to think clearly." I explained that I had spent months documenting their crimes, building a case with legal and media professionals, and preparing for this exact moment. I told them about the forensic accountant, the journalist cousin, and the mountain of evidence that would destroy not just their finances but their reputation and freedom. My father's response was immediate rage. "You little bitch! After everything we have done for you, this is how you repay us. We could have just let you die in that hospital." "There it is," I said calmly. "The truth, finally. You could have just let me die, but you were too greedy even for that. You wanted to steal from me while I was dying and then profit from my death. That level of evil deserves consequences." My mother tried a different approach, switching to manipulation tactics that had probably worked on me for years. "Sweet Hina, you are upset and not thinking clearly. We can work this out as a family. We can pay your medical bills now and forget this whole misunderstanding." "It is not a misunderstanding, Mother. It is fraud, tax evasion, and criminal conspiracy. And it is too late for family negotiations, because I realized something important during my treatment. You are not my family. Family does not sacrifice children to protect money. What you are is a cautionary tale about what happens when greed replaces humanity. The conversation ended with my parents threatening legal action against me for theft of their private communications. I informed them that accessing family computers as an authorized user was not theft, and that their communications were evidence of crimes against me personally and the government collectively. As I prepared to leave, my father made one final attempt at control. "If you proceed with this, you will destroy our entire family. Your grandparents, your cousins, everyone will suffer when this becomes public." "No, Dad. You destroyed our family when you chose money over your daughter's life. I am just revealing the destruction you already caused. The difference is that now everyone will know who really caused the suffering." Over the following weeks, our alliance network expanded rapidly. Marcus published a preliminary article about financial fraud in medical crisis situations using anonymous details from our case to build public interest. Rebecca worked with federal investigators who were very interested in the tax evasion and asset concealment evidence. But the most powerful ally emerged from an unexpected source: Dr. Patricia Williams, the oncologist who had treated me throughout my cancer journey. Dr. Williams had become suspicious when my parents repeatedly assured her that finances were not a concern, while my bills remained consistently unpaid. She had begun her own informal investigation and was relieved when I contacted her with evidence. "I have treated thousands of cancer patients," Dr. Williams told me during our meeting. "I have seen families sacrifice everything for their children's treatment, and I have seen families struggle with impossible financial decisions. But I have never seen parents with significant wealth systematically deceive medical providers while abandoning their child's financial responsibility. This is not just fraud. It is a form of medical abandonment that could have cost you your life." Dr. Williams became crucial to our case because she could testify about the medical necessity of my treatment and the potential consequences of delayed or inadequate care due to financial barriers. Her professional credibility and emotional testimony about watching parents essentially abandon their dying daughter would be devastating in court. The alliance also included several family members who had unknowingly contributed money to my parents' fraud scheme. Aunt Susan was particularly angry when she learned that her $5,000 donation had gone directly into my parents' personal account rather than toward my medical care. "I trusted them completely," Susan told Marcus during his expanded investigation. "When they asked for help with Serafina's medical bills, I never imagined they were wealthy people running a con game on their own family. I feel like an accessory to their fraud against my own niece." Our network now included a journalist, a forensic accountant, a respected oncologist, defrauded family members, and federal investigators. We had documentation spanning years of financial crimes, recorded admissions of intent to commit fraud, and professional testimony about medical abandonment. But as our alliance strengthened and our evidence mounted, something unexpected happened that would threaten everything we had built. We were about to discover that one of our most trusted allies had been playing a completely different game from the beginning. 3 weeks into our coordinated legal and media strategy, everything seemed to be progressing perfectly. Rebecca had filed formal complaints with the IRS and FBI regarding my parents' tax evasion and asset concealment. Marcus had published a follow-up article that generated significant public interest and media coverage. Dr. Williams had provided detailed medical testimony about the potential life-threatening consequences of financial abandonment during cancer treatment. Then Rebecca Torres called me with news that shattered everything we had built. "Serafina, we have a serious problem." Rebecca's voice was tight with anger and frustration. "Thomas Sterling contacted me directly. He is offering to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for immunity." Thomas Sterling, my parents' financial advisor who had helped orchestrate their entire asset concealment scheme. The man whose emails contained some of our most damaging evidence against my parents. He was now positioning himself as a whistleblower rather than a co-conspirator. "That actually sounds like good news," I said, confused by Rebecca's tone. If he testifies against my parents, it strengthens our case. You do not understand. Sterling is not just offering to testify against your parents. He is claiming that he was coerced into participating in their scheme against his professional judgment. He is painting himself as another victim while positioning your parents as the masterminds who forced him to violate his ethical obligations. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If Sterling successfully portrayed himself as a coerced accomplice, rather than an enthusiastic co-conspirator, he could receive immunity while providing testimony that would actually help my parents' defense strategy. But the worst news was yet to come. There is more, Rebecca continued. Sterling claims that you approached him months ago before your cancer diagnosis, asking about asset protection strategies for young adults with potential health risks. He is suggesting that you were complicit in planning this scheme from the beginning. That is completely impossible, I shouted. I never spoke to Sterling before discovering my parents' fraud. I never even knew who he was until I found his emails. I believe you completely, but Sterling has documentation that appears to support his version. He has emails supposedly from you, phone records showing calls between your number and his office, and even handwritten notes supposedly from meetings you had with him. The room spun around me as I realized what had happened. Sterling was not just betraying our case. He was framing me as a co-conspirator in my own financial abandonment. Somehow, he had manufactured evidence to suggest that I had helped plan my parents' scheme to avoid my own medical expenses. Over the following days, the full scope of Sterling's betrayal became clear. He had been working with my parents from the moment they realized I was investigating their fraud. Together, they had constructed an elaborate false narrative, where I was portrayed as an ungrateful daughter who had participated in financial planning and was now trying to extort my parents when the plan did not work as expected. Sterling's manufactured evidence was sophisticated and convincing. The emails supposedly from me discussed preparing for potential medical emergencies and ensuring family financial security regardless of health outcomes. The handwritten notes supposedly from our meetings showed detailed discussions about offshore accounts and asset protection strategies. Most devastatingly, Sterling claimed that my investigation into my parents' finances was not discovery of their betrayal, but rather an attempt to gather evidence for a planned extortion scheme, when I realized their original plan would not provide the financial outcomes I expected. This is character assassination, Marcus said during our emergency meeting. Sterling is essentially arguing that you conspired to defraud yourself and are now angry that the conspiracy did not work out in your favor. The legal implications were terrifying. If Sterling's version gained credibility, I could face criminal charges for conspiracy, fraud, and extortion. Everything I had endured, the cancer, the betrayal, the months of investigation, could be twisted into evidence of my own criminality. But the emotional impact was even worse than the legal jeopardy. Sterling's narrative suggested that I was not a victim of my parents' greed, but rather a willing participant who had gotten greedy myself. It painted me as someone who had planned to profit from my own potential death and was now seeking revenge because the plan had backfired. The media coverage shifted almost immediately. Where previous articles had portrayed me as a cancer survivor betrayed by greedy parents, new reports began questioning my motives and credibility. Social media comments turned vicious with people suggesting that I was a manipulative daughter trying to steal from parents who had sacrificed for my medical care. My parents seized on Sterling's betrayal to launch their own counteroffensive. They released a carefully crafted statement portraying themselves as heartbroken parents whose terminally ill daughter had become consumed with greed and resentment during her medical treatment. "We love Serafina unconditionally," my mother's statement read. "We have supported her throughout this difficult journey both emotionally and financially. We are devastated that her illness has affected her judgment to the point where she would make these hurtful and false accusations against the family that loves her." The statement was masterfully written, combining just enough truth with strategic omissions to create a compelling alternative narrative. They acknowledged providing emotional support while glossing over their financial abandonment. They referenced my illness affecting my judgment, suggesting that cancer treatment had made me mentally unstable and vindictive. Within a week, our carefully constructed case was in ruins. Rebecca warned me that federal prosecutors were now considering whether to pursue charges against me based on Sterling's evidence. Marcus found that media outlets were no longer interested in our story, viewing it as a family dispute rather than a clear case of financial fraud. Dr. Williams remained supportive, but warned me that Sterling's narrative could affect her ability to testify effectively. If this becomes a case about family financial planning rather than medical abandonment, she explained, my testimony about the medical necessity of treatment becomes less relevant. Even family members who had previously supported me began expressing doubts. Aunt Susan called to tell me that while she still loved me, she was concerned about the conflicting information and thought maybe the situation was more complicated than she had initially understood. Sitting in my apartment one evening, surrounded by legal documents and medical bills that remained unpaid, I felt more alone than I had during the darkest days of my cancer treatment. Sterling's betrayal had not just undermined our legal strategy, it had isolated me from the support network that had given me strength to fight. But as I reviewed Sterling's manufactured evidence for the 100th time, searching for flaws that Rebecca and Marcus had missed, I noticed something that everyone else had overlooked. Something that would not just expose Sterling's lies, but reveal an even deeper level of betrayal that none of us had suspected. The breakthrough came at 2 a.m. while I was reviewing Sterling's fabricated emails for inconsistencies that could expose his lies. I had been staring at the same documents for hours when something about the metadata finally caught my attention. The creation dates and timestamps on the supposedly old emails showed subtle irregularities that suggested they had been backdated using software manipulation. But more importantly, I realized that Sterling had made a critical error in his fabrication. In one of the fake emails supposedly from me, he referenced a specific offshore banking regulation that had only been implemented 6 weeks ago, months after the email was allegedly written. Sterling had been so focused on creating convincing content that he had overlooked this anachronistic detail that proved the entire email chain was manufactured recently. I called Rebecca immediately despite the late hour. She was initially skeptical, having become cautious about any evidence that seemed too convenient after Sterling's betrayal. But when her forensic analysis confirmed the metadata inconsistencies and regulatory anachronism, her excitement was palpable. "This is exactly what we need," Rebecca said. "But we need more than just proof that Sterling lied. We need to understand why he betrayed us and whether there are other manufactured pieces of evidence we have not identified yet." The answer came from an unexpected source, Jennifer Park, a former employee of Sterling's financial advisory firm, who contacted Marcus after reading his articles. Jennifer had been Sterling's assistant for 3 years before quitting 6 months earlier due to what she described as increasingly unethical business practices. "Thomas Sterling is not just a financial advisor," Jennifer explained during our meeting. "He runs a sophisticated operation that helps wealthy clients conceal assets and avoid financial obligations. What happened to you is not unique. It is part of his standard business model." Jennifer revealed that Sterling's firm specialized in what they called liability shielding for wealthy families facing potential financial drains from family members with expensive medical conditions, legal problems, or addiction issues. My parents had not just hired Sterling to hide their assets. They had hired him to implement a proven strategy for abandoning family members who became financial burdens. "Sterling has helped dozens of families do exactly what your parents did to you," Jennifer continued. "He has standard procedures for asset concealment, legal documentation that provides plausible deniability, and even template communications for maintaining emotional relationships while avoiding financial responsibility." But Jennifer's most damaging revelation was that Sterling regularly manufactured evidence to protect his clients when their schemes were exposed. He had successfully defended previous cases by framing victims as co-conspirators, using his insider knowledge of financial planning to create convincing false documentation. He told me that the key to protecting wealthy clients was making sure that any family member who discovered their abandonment could be discredited as a greedy accomplice rather than a genuine victim, Jennifer explained. He called it flipping the narrative and bragged about never losing a case where family members tried to expose his clients. Jennifer provided us with internal company documents showing Sterling's systematic approach to family financial abandonment. We discovered template letters, standard asset concealment strategies, and even training materials for staff on how to maintain plausible deniability when helping clients abandon family members. Most importantly, Jennifer had copies of communications between Sterling and my parents that occurred after I began investigating their fraud. These communications showed clear evidence of conspiracy to obstruct justice, witness tampering, and manufacturing false evidence specifically to frame me as a co-conspirator. Armed with this new evidence, Rebecca contacted federal prosecutors to demonstrate that Sterling's supposed cooperation was actually a continuation of his criminal conspiracy with my parents. The manufactured evidence against me was not just false. It was part of an ongoing federal crime that included obstruction of justice and conspiracy charges. But our most powerful new ally emerged from the prosecutor's office itself. Assistant Federal Prosecutor Maria Valdez had been assigned to investigate Sterling's claims against me when she noticed irregularities that suggested prosecutorial misconduct in previous cases involving Sterling's clients. Sterling has been using the federal justice system as a weapon to protect his criminal clients, Prosecutor Valdez explained during our meeting. He provides false evidence that federal prosecutors have unknowingly used to prosecute victims of his clients' financial crimes. We have identified at least 12 previous cases where Sterling's manufactured evidence resulted in wrongful prosecutions. Valdez was not just interested in prosecuting my parents and Sterling. She was building a comprehensive case against Sterling's entire criminal enterprise. My situation had become the keystone case that would expose a years-long conspiracy to use federal law enforcement to prosecute the victims of financial crimes while protecting the wealthy perpetrators. Sterling made a critical error when he targeted you, Valdez continued. Your documentation of their original crimes is so thorough that it clearly demonstrates the timeline of their conspiracy. When combined with Jennifer's insider evidence and our analysis of Sterling's pattern of manufacturing evidence, we can prove that everything Sterling claimed about your involvement was fabricated specifically to obstruct our investigation. Over the following weeks, our case transformed from a simple family financial dispute into a federal investigation of organized financial crime. Sterling's betrayal, which had initially seemed to destroy our chances for justice, had actually exposed a much larger criminal enterprise that federal prosecutors were eager to prosecute. The media narrative shifted again as Marcus published a comprehensive exposé of Sterling's criminal enterprise, using Jennifer's insider evidence and federal court documents to demonstrate the systematic nature of Sterling's crimes against families facing medical emergencies. Family financial predators. How wealthy Americans use federal law enforcement to prosecute their own victims became a national story that generated congressional interest in reforming asset protection laws and investigating prosecutorial misconduct in financial crime cases. My parents, who had thought Sterling's betrayal would save them, found themselves facing not just the original fraud charges, but additional charges for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and participating in an ongoing criminal enterprise. Sterling's attempt to frame me had actually increased their criminal liability while exposing them to federal racketeering charges. But the most satisfying moment came when Aunt Susan called to apologize for doubting me after reading Marcus's latest article. "I should have trusted you from the beginning," Susan said, her voice heavy with regret. "When I read about what Sterling has been doing to families for years, I realized that you were never the problem. Your parents chose to do business with a criminal who specializes in destroying families, and that tells me everything I need to know about who they really are." The family members who had been manipulated by Sterling's false narrative began reaching out with support and apologies. They had not just been deceived about my character. they had been victims of a sophisticated criminal operation designed to protect wealthy family members who abandoned their relatives during medical crises. As we prepared for the final phase of our legal strategy, I realized that Sterling's betrayal had actually been the best thing that could have happened to our case. His criminal overreach had exposed a much larger pattern of corruption while providing federal prosecutors with the evidence they needed to pursue serious criminal charges against all the conspirators. The final courtroom confrontation happened on a cold February morning, almost exactly 1 year after my cancer diagnosis. The federal courthouse was packed with media, family members, and representatives from other families who had been victimized by Sterling's criminal enterprise. What had started as my personal quest for justice had become a landmark case exposing systemic corruption in the asset protection industry. My parents sat at the defendant's table, looking older and smaller than I remembered their expensive suits and perfect composure, replaced by the hollow-eyed appearance of people facing serious federal prison time. Sterling sat separately, having been abandoned by his former clients once his criminal methods were exposed. The man who had spent years manipulating the federal justice system was now facing 37 federal charges, including racketeering, conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. Prosecutor Valdez presented our evidence methodically and devastatingly. The jury heard recordings of my parents discussing their plans to let me die rather than spend their money. They saw documentation of Sterling's systematic fraud against dozens of families. They reviewed Jennifer's insider testimony about the criminal enterprise designed to weaponize the legal system against victims of financial abandonment. But the most powerful moment came when Dr. Williams testified about the medical impact of financial abandonment during cancer treatment. She explained how delayed or inadequate treatment due to financial barriers could have resulted in my death, making my parents' asset concealment scheme not just fraud, but potentially a form of negligent homicide. In my professional opinion, Dr. Williams told the jury, the defendant's actions created a life-threatening situation for their daughter while maintaining plausible deniability about their ability to provide financial support. This pattern is consistent with what I can only describe as premeditated medical abandonment. The defense strategy crumbled completely when Sterling attempted to testify in his own defense. Under cross-examination, he was forced to admit that he had manufactured evidence that his business model involved helping wealthy clients abandon family members, and that he had used federal prosecutors as unwitting accomplices in his criminal conspiracy. When my parents took the stand, their testimony revealed the full depth of their moral bankruptcy. Under oath, they admitted that they had viewed my cancer diagnosis primarily as a financial threat rather than a medical emergency. They acknowledged that they had never intended to pay my medical bills and had planned to use my potential death as a tax write-off. We did what any reasonable parents would do to protect the family's financial security. My father testified, apparently unaware of how his words sounded to the jury. Serafina's medical situation was unfortunate, but we could not allow sentiment to override sound financial planning. My mother's testimony was even more damaging. When asked about her recorded statement that my death would be financially beneficial, she replied, "I was simply acknowledging the reality that Serafina's continued medical expenses were unsustainable from a family budget perspective." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. My parents were sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. Sterling received 22 years for racketeering and running a criminal enterprise. The judge also ordered full restitution for my medical expenses, plus punitive damages that would bankrupt my parents even after their prison sentences ended. But the legal victory was only part of my healing process. The real transformation happened in the months following the trial, when I began building what Dr. Williams called a chosen family of people who had supported me through the darkest period of my life. Marcus became not just a cousin, but a true brother, someone who had risked his professional reputation to expose the truth about our family's corruption. Rebecca became a mentor and friend, offering guidance as I navigated the complex emotions of having my own parents imprisoned. Dr. Williams remained a source of wisdom and support as I completed my cancer treatment with proper financial resources for the first time. Jennifer Park became an unlikely but treasured friend, bonding over our shared experience of exposing Sterling's criminal operation. Aunt Susan and other family members who had been manipulated by Sterling's lies became part of a new family structure based on honesty and genuine care rather than obligation and financial manipulation. The most unexpected relationship developed with Prosecutor Valdez, who offered me a position as a victim advocate helping other families navigate financial crimes during medical crises. Working with families who had experienced similar betrayals gave me purpose and perspective that transformed my trauma into meaningful advocacy work. My medical recovery progressed smoothly once I had proper financial support and reduced stress levels. The doctors were amazed at how quickly my health improved once I was no longer carrying the emotional burden of family betrayal and financial uncertainty. It turned out that healing from cancer was much easier when I was not simultaneously fighting a war against my own parents. A year after the trial, I organized a small dinner party for my chosen family. Sitting around the table with people who had genuinely supported me through crisis, I realized that losing my biological family had actually freed me to build authentic relationships based on love rather than DNA obligation. Marcus raised a toast that perfectly captured my journey. To Serafina, who proved that sometimes the best thing that can happen to a family is losing the members who were never really family at all. The experience taught me that blood relationships mean nothing when they are poisoned by greed and manipulation. Real family consists of people who show up during your darkest moments, who fight for your well-being even when it costs them something, and who choose to love you through actions rather than just words. My parents chose silence over support money over their daughter, and criminal conspiracy over honest conversation. But their betrayal led me to discover something more valuable than their stolen wealth. A chosen family built on genuine love, mutual respect, and shared commitment to justice. Have you ever discovered that the people you trusted most were actually working against you? Have you found yourself building a chosen family after biological family failed you? Drop your experiences in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories help other survivors know they are not alone in rebuilding after family betrayal. If this story of justice and chosen family resonated with you, please hit that like button to help other people find hope in their darkest family moments. Subscribe for more real stories of survival justice and building authentic relationships after betrayal. And please share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve better than toxic family members who prioritize money over love. Thank you for witnessing my journey from victim to survivor to advocate. Remember that your worth is never determined by how family members treat you. And sometimes losing the wrong people opens space for the right people to enter your life. Here is to building families based on choice love and genuine support rather than blood obligation and financial manipulation.